Hi, and welcome back for another of the Federation of Asian Storytellers webinars. And today we are stepping right outside our comfort zone, heading over to Europe, where I'm delighted that Rebecca Lemaire is standing by. We were talking just before we started this session, going to do something that is much more oriented towards those of us who like to use storytelling in an educational context. So, Rebecca, it's really good to have you with us today, and perhaps you might just like to introduce yourself first of all, before we actually get into the meat of your session. Hi, please.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here, and yeah, I discovered Feast just a few months ago, and I just really like the atmosphere and the energy of the organization. So yeah, I'm really happy to be participating as well.
Great.
So yeah, my name is Rebecca. I'm a storyteller. I'm an English teacher, and I'm a teacher trainer. And I specialize in using storytelling for language learning. So I go into schools, I do, so sometimes I just do a day in a school, or I use it a lot with my own students of all ages. So I've got primary students, I've got secondary students, and I've got adult students. I also work for the Hands Up project, which is a project which works with Palestinian students in Gaza. And so I connect weekly with a class, and all of the volunteers do the same. So we connect weekly with a class, and we use storytelling and theatre as a means of basically practicing the language. So we're not really teaching them, but we're all teachers or storytellers who've used storytelling in language learning. And so we're just using storytelling for them to use the language in context, basically. So yeah,
that's very good.
We're just going to do a little bit of reflection at the beginning, and maybe so while we're waiting for more people to join. First of all, who teaches English or a foreign language? Can you put your hands up? So none of you actually teach languages. So you're all storytellers, yeah? I can't, Lynn? Sometimes. Okay.
I have done in the past, and sometimes, yes, I still do.
Okay. So when I'm talking about storytelling, I mean the traditional way without a book or without a text or without visuals, which many teachers, when they tell us stories to their students, they tend to use books. So I'm just kind of clarifying that. Because often, yeah, when I just say storytelling, they imagine me sitting with a book in front of very young students. So this storytelling is storytelling, which I'm assuming, all of you do, just speaking, narrating, telling, and not necessarily with a book, not necessarily with visuals, and not necessarily for 5 or 6 year olds, but for all ages. So I'll start with a primary story, just part of the Gingerbread Man. And I would like you to participate. So maybe we can unmute everyone. I don't know, I think because if we all speak at the same time, we won't hear everyone, but it doesn't matter. We'll kind of see each other. So I would like you to join in when you feel it's right, and you'll see it's very easy. So the Gingerbread Man, I assume you all know the story, and I'm going to use my friend the kalimba. So once upon a time, there was a grandma, and she made a little gingerbread man with a little round head, little arms, little legs, and she gave him 3 little buttons down the front with raisins. She used some red currants for a smile, and she finished with the eyes and nose. She put a little bit of sugar around his forehead and around his wrists. She opened the oven, she put the gingerbread man in the oven, and she closed the oven. After 5 minutes, the kitchen smelled so good, as you can imagine. And she thought, I'm so looking forward to eating this gingerbread man. But suddenly she heard a sound. It was coming from the oven. And so she opened the oven, and to her great surprise, the little gingerbread man jumped out of the oven. The biscuit, the gingerbread man, it was alive. And it ran to the door, and she said, "Stop! I want to eat you." Can you repeat that after me? Stop! I want to eat you. And guess what? The little gingerbread man, he looked at her, he smiled, and he said, or he sang, "Run, run as fast as you can. You can't catch me, I'm the gingerbread man. Yeah, run, run as fast as you can. You can't catch me, I'm the gingerbread man." And he ran out of the door. And there in the garden, he saw the grandpa, and the grandpa saw him, and he thought, huh? And he said,
Stop.
Stop.
I want to eat you. And the little gingerbread man said, "Run, run as fast as you can. You can't catch me, I'm the gingerbread man. Yeah, run, run as fast as you can. You can't catch me, I'm the gingerbread man." And I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but keep going as if you were 6-year-old students. And the little gingerbread man ran through the fields, and he met a cow, and the cow said,
Stop.
"Oh, I want to eat you." And the gingerbread man said, "Run, run as fast as you can. You can't catch me, I'm the gingerbread man." Carried on running, and he met a horse, and he met a goat. And as long as you have the time and the attention of the children, you can keep seeing new animals. And finally, he got to a river. Do you think the gingerbread man can swim?
No.
No, he couldn't. You're exactly right. He's a biscuit after all. He'd break. And he thought, oh, I can't swim. What am I to do? He looked to the right, he looked to the left. There was no bridge. And that's when the fox, with his pointy nose and his bushy tail, came out from behind a tree, looked at him and thought, he looks good. And he said, what do you think he said?
Hello?
He didn't say stop. Very good. He said, "Hello, my friend. Can I help you?" And the little gingerbread man looked at him and said, "Really? Don't you eat gingerbread man? Well, all these people are trying to eat me. All these animals are trying to help me. Can you help me?" Etc., etc. He got into the water. He sat on his back. He sat on his head. I'm not going to finish the whole story because I want to kind of keep moving on. So after this story, and imagine that being in a classroom with 15 to 30 primary, from 5 to 8 maybe. You can change the song if the kids are slightly older and they don't want to have a kiddie song. You can sort of rap it. Run, run as fast as you can. You can't catch me, I'm the gingerbread man. So I've kind of done this story with beginners of different ages, so you can sort of adapt the tone. What do you think some of the advantages are of doing this traditional story in a language classroom? I mean, also you could say just in general, but write in the chat one advantage you see in doing storytelling in this way, without a book, without visuals, for children or even adults who don't necessarily understand everything that you're saying, or even very little. Okay, so I have repetition gives us an easy way to join in. Yeah, the repetition, associate words to expressions. Yeah. Do you mean, what do you mean by expressions, Anna? Do you mean facial expressions, or do you mean spoken expressions, or eye contact? Yeah. Repetitive and expressive language. Yeah. Actions help explain. Rhyme, man, can. Yeah. Participation, exactly. I mean, so with a book or with visuals, it's much harder to do all these things that you've mentioned. Yeah. So exactly, and I've got a few more. I mean, most of what you've said, I think I'll have in my ideas. But in my experience, basically, the first thing for me, if you're going to be teaching a classroom of children, teenagers, adults, when you start telling lots and lots and lots of stories in this kind of direct way, a sense of community comes about in the classroom, and people start, and that is simply sharing experiences. So, you know, if you go on a long trip with somebody, you really connect to that person in some way, because you've lived through problems together, you've lived through fear together, you've been on adventures together. Interactive, eye contact, direct emotions, you've mentioned that in the chat. Adaptable. So for me, the idea of doing it orally like this without a book is that you can adapt it to the age, to the level, so you can change the language, and to their mood. You can make it longer, shorter, you can make it scarier or funnier according to how they're responding. So your tone can change, the language can change, the speed and the length of the story, something that you can't really do with a book or visuals that you're using sort of in a more rigid way. Natural listening. So even though it's very expressive, it's slightly theatrical, especially for this one, because it was for very young children, as I kind of do storytelling for learners of English, even in secondary or for adults, then it's less theatrical sometimes, but so they're kind of really getting used to this natural listening and speaking. Actually, I'll talk about the speaking afterwards. So natural listening and getting used to listening without having any visuals, because in this day and age, we're so bombarded with visuals that there's a good TED talk about that, how we're actually losing the capacity to listen to different sounds, to different words. We're losing that. So it's kind of useful to do it in the language that you're learning as well. And then you serve as a model for natural speaking. So more and more you just speak. If you're telling linear stories as well, you're just talking. And we often ask our students to give presentations or to do things or to learn a story and tell us, but a lot of teachers are not actually willing to tell stories themselves. So without a book, so it's kind of giving the example. Vocabulary in context, very light on materials. As teachers, it's always a bit, preparing materials. So if you've got your stories in your head, that's it, you've got them. It keeps the magic of storytelling. There's no barrier between the students and the teacher. And it encourages imagination and creativity. So no visuals to say what is right and wrong. I'm sort of flying through this because I'd like to spend more time on the activities. We can come back to it if there are questions, or the sense that we're all in this community together, probably yes, exactly. So we always say that to learn a language, you have to be in the country, but with storytelling, that's the closest we get to that. So we're kind of using the emotions, like they say, what we also learn when we're touched emotionally. So yeah, this community really helps. And for those who've taught young learners, it's just this classroom management. They start being kinder to each other. They start sort of respecting each other, in my experience, when we do a lot of storytelling. Okay, so how to choose stories. Would you like to quickly put something in the chat, or would you like to say something about how would you choose stories for students if you're teaching students of a language?
Very simple ones, first of all, with a lot of repetition, but do you actually choose the language in them to target what you're teaching?
That's a perfect question. I'm going to answer it in a second. Sensory, multidisciplinary learning, visual, auditory, kinesthetic. Yeah, exactly. So for me, the first rule is Anna's rule, which is stories that you love, stories that make you tick. So that for me is the most important. And then, and I think as language teachers, we forget that. And so we kind of go straight for, it's funny because I think I'm the only one here who really teaches a lot of languages. So it's quite different from doing these workshops with teachers, because their first thing is, well, the language the curriculum's language. And I don't agree with that at all. For me, it's stories that you love, stories that make you tick. For lower levels, generally at the beginning, a lot of repetition, so like the Gingerbread Man that I just did, or the Three Pigs, so whether it's the language that keeps being repeated, or sort of circular stories, spiral stories with 3 times the same sort of action. Familiar images and some mystery, but that's nothing to do with languages really. It would be the same kind of stories that you would choose for native speaking children, children whose language is the one you are telling the story in. At the beginning, when I start a class with 6-year-olds, I choose these stories, but after about 5-6 weeks, if I've told them a story every week, I can really start telling them linear stories without much theater, without too many songs, and they start getting used to this, they start acquiring this capacity of listening. So I really notice that. And whether they understand everything, it doesn't matter, because they've gotten used to not understanding every word and still enjoying. And that for me is one of the keys in learning a foreign language. Is you have to get used to just guessing whatever you don't understand. You have to get used to not understanding a lot of what is being said and still sort of getting the gist, still enjoying. So that kind of works really well with younger ones. Higher groups, simply, I mean, these are basically what you would choose as storytellers for, again, for native students, for people who you would be telling the stories or, to in your own language. And so the question that Sheila asked was the language. Well, basically, very often teachers ask me, so do you have a story with, what was the last one somebody said, do you have a story with question tags? So like, can he can't swim, can he? Or you're coming, aren't you? And I said, well, any story. And then you just throw a few dialogues in. So if you've got the giant turnip and he's like, well, she can help, can't she? Oh, she can't help, can she? She's too little. And you just kind of put a little bit of that language in if you really want to work on the language. But generally, I do not choose stories to the language that I'm learning. I try to keep the stories apart from the curriculum so that they love stories and they don't feel like they're always being linked to exercises and to things that they're learning at the moment. I do try sometimes, you know, if we've done the weather, then I'll tell the sun and the wind, because, you know, I try to kind of put some stories with some vocab. But when I go into schools, they don't always know their curriculum, and I just go with it. And it's just about learning new vocabulary in context or using the vocab they've already got. There's this idea with the, you know, the magic of storytelling. If you're visualizing and living the story as you're telling it, they live it and see it and feel it as well, even if they don't understand the language. And in my experience, that's really true. You know, I was telling the little half-chipped 5-year-olds, and I thought, I'm sure they can't understand. And at one point, one of the little girls went, consecuencias. And she said it in Spanish. She was still thinking in Spanish, but she was obviously understanding the main message of my story and enjoying it. So part 2, we've got activities, because that's what most teachers ask me. So what do we do with the stories? Because, you know, I'm a teacher, I have to teach something. I can't just tell stories. I need to do activities. So for them to learn the language, right? And also we often feel that we're taught when we're doing our teacher training to talk the least possible, which is the funniest thing for a storyteller. But basically the ideas of my activities are to bring a teacher-led story. You might tell a story for 5 to 10 minutes, and that will trigger an hour or more of the students talking. So that's the idea, to sort of slowly bring the students to talking more. But however, activities are not necessary. If you tell a story to language learners every single week or every single class, or however time you've got, you know, a story can be 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 7 minutes at the end with no activity whatsoever. That's how I usually start. And they start loving the stories, and the language just somehow sticks to them. I mean, I have some students, you know, at the end of the year, so they're like 5 or 6, and we don't learn the past at all, but because I've told them a story every single week, and usually in the past, they start talking in the past. It's somehow magic happens, you know. So yeah, I really don't think that I really encourage teachers not to do activities with every single story, so that you don't kind of discourage the students, so they don't feel like, oh, again a story, and then we're going to have to do exercises. However, if you want to do activities, then I suggest moving away from the rigid structure of pre-listening, so pre-teaching vocab, during the listening, for example, ordering some pictures, and post-listening activities with true and false questions, etc., etc. So it's moving away from testing the students, moving away from true or false, so right and wrong, basically. How do we do that? Keeping the magic of storytelling, so as I just kind of mentioned, encouraging imagination and creativity, and giving the students a voice. These are kind of the things that I like to do with my students. And so by giving them a voice, we're starting to get them to tell us stories. So there are different activities that I'm going to sort of look through today with you. I'm just going to sort of give you 1 or 2 activities for each section. But there are many, many more, which, I mean, Roger just invented one right now as we were talking, like, you know, as when you start, you just get more and more and more ideas. So interactive stories. So while I'm telling the story, something is happening. So we'll have a look at activities that we can do, but without cutting the flow. So I don't like to stop a story and to say, now do this, and because then it kind of cuts that magic, it cuts that flow. But sometimes I do, so we'll have a look at some of them. Learning, and as Sheila talked about in her last webinar, exploring the story. So it could be to learn the story, but still using creativity, not just learning okay, now learn the story, learn the order, you know, so it's kind of going a bit more in depth as Sheila's activities did too. So we're kind of giving the students more and more of a voice. So first of all, they're just interacting during the story, as we just did with the Gingerbread Man. Then they're sort of exploring the story, but from their point of view. So we're not telling them what's right or wrong. And then they're stepping out of the story and really kind of doing activities that are outside of the story that I've told. So the story is a stepping stone rather than the kind of source of information. And then the students are storytellers and story creators, which is still here, but I don't think we'll have time for that last part, and that just comes in any case afterwards. So I would start for 5 weeks telling interactive stories, then maybe with one story we'll explore more, then little by little. So it's a progression anyway, and then towards the end of the year I'll get the students to start creating their own stories if they haven't already, because sometimes just by telling stories they start saying, well, actually I wrote a story. Even 6-year-olds, I've written a story, can I tell the story today? So they want to anyway. So interactive stories, repetitions or songs, rhymes, which is the example that I just gave with the Gingerbread Man. So that would be for primary, yeah? If your students are very low level or you don't know what vocab they have, for example, I went into a school the other day and I wanted to do the 3 pigs and then the same story from the wolf's version. And even though they knew the story so well, obviously, and they were 6, so their language level was very, very low. But so I did this with them before, and I asked them, first of all, what's the story? The 3 little, and they could see this slide, and then they all guessed that it was the 3 little pigs. Okay, this was supposed to be a box that disappeared, and you've got 3 pictures of pigs. So you can imagine the 3 pigs here. So I had 3 little pigs here, and then I kind of said these sentences: I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house in. Who says this? And they all shouted, the wolf. And we had just said the wolf, said the pigs. No, by the hairs on my chinny chin chin, I will not let you in. Who says this? The wolf. So I moved the picture there. Oh, I don't have a pig. Yes, yeah, okay. So then we moved the pig there. And so we sort of went over the little rhymes before. And so by the time, these are difficult sentences for 6-year-old first-year language learners, but they were just joining in as much as they could. And by the end of the story, they could do it quite well. But they had seen it before. If you want to do it really well, you could take one word out at a time. So, rub out huff and puff, for example, and then you repeat it once or twice. It's also a lot of language here. I would usually if I wanted them to learn one thing properly, then I'd just choose one. For example, I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house in, so that they can really say it. This is another example. I've got my board at the beginning, and so we kind of go over the sentences a little bit, slightly higher level, maybe 2nd grade or 3rd grade, so 2nd or 3rd year that they started learning a language. And then I start the story, and by then they've already repeated the sentence with me. The Gingerbread Man is so easy that they usually just sort of join in without any problems. Another one is, what would you do now? So I'm just going to give you an example of an interactive. I'm going to give you 2 examples. I'm going to tell you 2 more stories in this section, and then we'll use those same stories for the activities in the other sections. So you could be telling the story and then saying, well, what would you do now? And then a few students give their answer, with whichever vocab they have, and then you keep going. Or I'll give you an example with Li and Gao. So this is from this book, David Heathfield's book, Storytelling with Our Students, which is a great book for, I feel it works better with slightly older students, so teenagers and adults. So I'll tell you Li and Gao, a Chinese story from David Heathfield's book. Okay, so I'll tell the story, and then at some point I might stop and I'll go like that, and you just say whatever comes to your head and to your mind, and we'll see if everybody talks at the same time. Then we'll do one by one, and if, just kind of say whatever, and then I'll carry on the story. So we don't really. My students get used to this very quickly. They don't have time to think and to write a perfect dialogue. They just have to say something on the spot, and it's never wrong. It's never, ever wrong. And so they just learn to just stop just speaking and using whatever vocab they have. And then maybe in another class, I'll go over that vocab. I'll try to remember the sentences or the grammar. Once upon a time, there were two men. Now, these men were extremely foolish, and they were neighbors. One of them was called Li, and the other one was called Gao. They were always competing. They were always trying to outdo each other. They were always trying to get something more than their neighbor. And one day, Li won 300 yuan at the gambling house. He was so happy, and he ran home with his money. And then he thought, Gao, he's going to want this money. Where shall I put it? And he started thinking, where shall I put the money so no one can find it? And he thought, I know, I'll put it
under the bed.
Finish my sentence.
Oh, I was going to say under the bed.
So he thought, I'll put it under the bed. And then he thought, no, my wife will find it, and then she might talk to her friends, and I'm sure Gao will find it. And I know, I'll put it
under the floorboard.
Under the floorboard. Fantastic. That floorboard is a bit rotten. I think no, it'll get wet and then I'll lose it. I know,
The roots of a tree.
I'll put it in the roots of a tree. That's a good idea. And so he thought, well, I won't put it in my garden because that's the first place where Gao will look for it. So I think I'll go into that empty space just on the other side down the lane. So he went there. He took his shovel because he thought, I'll have to kind of dig a little bit. And just next to the tree, he thought, yeah, here. I don't need to put it between the roots. I'll just put it right here. So he dug a hole. He put the 300 yuan in the hole. He covered the hole. He tapped the soil for no one to see. He put a few leaves. No one could see anyone had put anything there. And he took out a piece of paper and he wrote a note. What do you think he wrote on the note? You can write it in the chat, maybe. Write it. What did he write on the note?
Where he buried it so you wouldn't forget.
So right, can you tell me the sentence? So he would have written,
where he buried it so he wouldn't forget.
Yeah, so the sentence would be, I buried the money near the tree in the empty space down the lane, yeah? Okay. Or?
This is my gold.
This is my gold. Sorry, this money is all mine. Wet soil, be careful. Fantastic. Well, I'll tell you what he wrote. He wrote, 300 yuan are not buried here. And he put the note over the soil that he had just flattened. Fantastic. And he went home. The next day, Gao was walking around thinking, where could he have put that money? If I were him, and then here depends what language you're learning. You could say, if I were him, I would put it. And then you get the students to, and then, or he must have put it. And so every time, so I don't know if you noticed, but before when I said, I know I'll put it, and then I know I'll put it, and then I know, and then the students will say, I'll put it. And so they kind of, you know, you say less and less of the sentence. And so more and more they're using that language structure. So then Gao was thinking, where could he have put it? Or he might have put it. Any ideas? He might have put it.
In his
In a
stable.
jar.
He might have put it in a jar. I'll go and have a look in a jar. Or, Roger, what did you say?
In his stable.
He might have put it in his stable. And as he was walking around thinking about where the money could be, there on the ground, he saw a note. The note said, 300 yuan are not buried.
301 is not buried here.
Exactly. And he thought, ha, 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 he's so foolish. And so he went and got his shovel and he dug up the money and he got the money and he put it in his pocket and he covered the soil and he tapped it down and he put a few leaves and no one would ever guessed the soil had been moved around there. And he got out a piece of paper and he wrote a note. What do you think he wrote on the note?
You want somebody here.
Not the one who took the money.
Sorry, I can't hear very well.
It was not me who took the money.
Yeah. And Alvin,
might have
what did you
thought.
say, Alvin?
300 yuans are buried here.
So what, I'll tell you what he wrote. He wrote, Gao did not steal 300 yuan. So basically you're just telling the story and you're literally giving the students 2-3 seconds to say something, and you sort of, if you can, you integrate it in the story. If you can't, you say, well, you would have thought he would have done that but he didn't, or you know, you kind of find a way. And so they're really participating in the story. It helps them to understand the story better, because if in that moment they've got a question, they can kind of, or you'll realize quickly, okay, they didn't get that part of it, so I'll have to sort of re-say it in a different way, retell it. So one, it helps them to understand, and two, it just keeps their attention and it keeps them engaged, and they're using some language in context, which is the best way to learn language, basically, to use it in context. Okay. So another activity, again, still in interactive. So here it was maybe for a lower level because I'm just asking them for one word. And now I'm going to ask for a sentence. So I'm going to kind of, in this sense, I would, for this story, I would put people in pairs. I would ask them, okay, just know who your pair is. And when I stop, you're gonna have literally 30 seconds to have a very short dialogue. So one of them is gonna be one character, the other one is gonna be the other character. And I usually tell them, you don't need to decide now. Whoever has the first idea is the first one to speak. So I've done this story with pre-intermediate. So the level is quite low, teenagers or adults. And so I will start with, so the story is called The Farmer and the Mathematician. It's a story from Venezuela. And I have these pictures on the board. So we could, I mean, I'm not going to ask you, but I would ask them, what can you see on the board? So, okay, let's do it. What can you see on the board? Because some of them are not that obvious. Some of them are. So give me words linked to the images that you can see on the board.
A man digging.
I can see the farmer, mathematician,
yeah,
question and answer sign, a bored teenager,
looks like a train station.
a tired man.
Yeah.
A winner.
A winner, yeah. And what do you think he wins? And what do you call this? So this, I think this was for yawning, actually, because I was using the word yawning. That's it. So now what I ask the students to do is ask me questions about the story. And so slowly they start getting an idea about the story. So ask me questions about the story, and you've got images to help you. So for example, you could ask me, are the mathematician and the farmer, are they friends? And I'd say, no, they don't really know each other. Yeah. So do you want to ask me a few questions?
Does someone go on a train in this station? In
Yes.
This story?
Yes. So the farmer and the mathematician meet on a train.
Who is making up the rules?
Good question. So the mathematician makes the rules.
Are the rules so boring that he yawns?
The rules, sorry?
Are the rules so boring that he yawns?
That's a good question. The rules are not boring. No, the rules make the story. The second rule especially makes the story, and it's the mathematician that yawns again and again and again. Can you guess why he's yawning?
He is tired.
No, not really. You've got another picture that can tell you the idea. Oh,
He's a
bored.
very rude mathematician.
He is quite rude, actually. He is quite rude. Yeah. Okay. So you see that you start. So it's a way of sort of pre-teaching the vocab, but you're already in the story, and people are already kind of thinking. So it's not like, okay, now I'm going to teach you some words, and then we're going to do a story. So it is one way of pre-teaching vocabulary for a story. Which I use when I go into a language school and I don't know the students, I don't know if they know the language, and so you can sort of play with the images and go deeper into vocab as well.
So you would introduce first each picture and say, this is a farmer, this is a mathematician, this is a board with rules. You would introduce those words. It's just that because there's different people, it kind of, you would think, oh, there's many characters, but no, actually in the beginning you have to say, oh, these photos are to represent emotions, and these are to represent, you say that.
Yeah. I mean,
emotions.
It didn't. Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, with the first one, because we went through every single picture, they knew that this was bored and this was yawn because we had done it together. So I had elicited the vocab, and then eventually I gave them, okay, so this is bored. Whereas the upper intermediate people, because I didn't tell them anything, they just came and they said, so is there a bored student in the story? And I said, no, it's the mathematician who's bored. There is no bored student. That picture is just to represent the word bored. You could also do it just with words. You could even just put farmer, to enjoy, yawn, bored. You could just put the words as well instead of the pictures, which would just be a different exercise. Yeah. And it's just to get them to sort of start getting into the story, and it really helps with understanding the rest of the story once you're telling it without stopping, and they don't want to stop you. They've kind of already sort of accumulated the quick improvisation, okay? So I'm going to do it sort of in the same way as Li and Gao. I'm going to tell you the story, and when I stop, one of you has to be the mathematician, and then somebody answers as the farmer. But in class, I would put people into pairs, okay? Once upon a time, there was a farmer who lived in Venezuela, and believe it or not, he had never, ever taken a train. And that day, he was going to take the train. So he got to the train station. I'm just going to speed the story up a bit. I would kind of give more detail. But he got to the train station and he was amazed. He sat on the train. He looked around and he marveled at humans' inventiveness and ingenuity. And he couldn't believe it. And this thing would take him to the next town a few hours away, just in a few hours. And he got so excited and he was waiting for the train to depart, looking outside of the window. And next to him came and sat a man. Now, this man was a mathematician. This man had taken many trains. This man had taken this train many, many times. And this man was bored out of his mind before the journey had even begun. And the train departed. The farmer, he looked out of the window and he couldn't believe his eyes. The countryside dancing in front of his eyes, cows running backwards even. And he was looking at everything, enjoying every moment. And the mathematician next to him sighed, yawned, and thought, I can't carry on like this. I am so bored. But then he had an idea. He tapped the farmer on the shoulder and he said,
would you like to play a game?
Would you like to play a game? Farmer, anyone?
Yes.
Yeah.
So now keep going, Anna and Roger. So would you like to play a game? Yes.
Good. I'm going to give you some simple figures and you have to add them up and give me the answer. They're very unusual figures. Here we go. 3 plus 3 equals?
Fantastic. Stop. Okay, fantastic. So that's what I ask the students to do in their pairs. I give them 30 seconds. I kind of try to see if I can hear anything, but I don't go and check and say, oh, and here you made a mistake in your language. Or I just get them to speak for 30 seconds. And then I ask them, any interesting exchanges? What did he ask you? What did you say? And so they give me a little bit of feedback. I kind of remember the grammatical structures for another class, and then we keep going. The mathematician tapped the farmer on the shoulder, and he said, I don't know why you're so excited about this journey, but please, could you play a game with me? The game is called Questions and Answers, and this is how it goes. I ask you a question. If you don't know the answer, you give me a bolivar, the currency of Venezuela. Then you ask me a question. And if I don't know the answer, in that case, well, then I would give you a bolivar. What do you say? The farmer looked at him up and down and said, no, thank you. He carried on looking outside the window, enjoying every moment. And the farmer went back to sighing and yawning until he had another idea. He tapped the farmer on his shoulder and he said,
if you can ask me a question that I can't answer, I'll give you 10 bolivars.
Farmer? Can a farmer answer?
10 bolivars. Well, that's worth thinking about. Let me think about it for a minute.
Oh, please.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So I'll give them 30 seconds to a minute, little exchange. Well, he tapped the farmer on the shoulder and he said, oh, please, I'm asking you as a favor, just play this game with me, please. And to accommodate our differences, we'll change the rules a little. If I'll ask you a question, if you don't know the answer, you'll give me a bolivar. Then you ask me a question and, if I don't know the answer, I'll give you 500 bolivars. The farmer looked at him and said, okay. The mathematician was really happy. He asked his first question, what is an atom and in how many parts can it be divided? The farmer didn't even think about it. He reached into his pocket, he took out a bolivar and he gave it to the mathematician. Okay, your turn, said the mathematician. The farmer looked out of the window, he looked at the mathematician and he said, what goes up the mountain on 3 legs and comes down that very same mountain on 5 legs? The mathematician was quite surprised. He didn't expect to have a question that he wouldn't be able to answer immediately. And he thought, and he thought, and he thought, and he thought, and I won't go through every single detail, but he calculated, he divided, he multiplied, he tried to add things up that didn't add up. And the whole journey, he thought about this question. And the farmer enjoyed every minute. He talked to the people on the train. He went and had some tea in the carriage, etc., etc. They got to their destination. They got off the train. They were standing on the platform, and the mathematician said, "Well, congratulations." He shook his hand and he said, "I didn't expect that. I haven't got the answer. You've won fair and square." And he gave him 500 bolivars. The farmer put them in his pocket, and he was about to go, and the mathematician said, "Wait, please tell me, what goes up a mountain on 3 legs and comes down that very same mountain on 5 legs?" The farmer didn't even think about it. He took out 1 bolivar. He gave it to the mathematician. It's a good story, isn't it? Okay, so that was another example, and we'll reuse the same story afterwards. So that was another example of how to have an improvisation during the story. So little dialogues, etc. Riddles, the students can try to work out the riddle. This might take a bit more time, but you know, the teenagers really love that. Okay, let's move on to learning and exploring the story. The first thing, even though we're kind of learning the story that you've just told them, it's not a test. So there's still a lot of room to change the dialogues, to change whatever they want to change. For example, you can get them to sketch a scene. So you give them 2 minutes. I show them, you know, stick men. Sketch one of the scenes of the story, and you have to put a speech or a thought bubble, for example. So I'll show you what my students did for this story, yeah? So they have 1 or 2 minutes to sketch a scene of the story. And then they give it to their partner, or they show it to the class. That you kind of decide how you like to set things up. And then the others ask questions. So for example, you can ask me, is this the farmer? So let's say picture 1, is this the farmer? Yes, it is. Or is this the mathematician? No, it isn't. And then here, is this the farmer? Yes, no, it isn't. This is the mathematician. Is this the farmer? Yes, it is. And then eventually, is this when the farmer was arriving at the station? Yes, it is. Or is this when the farmer was leaving? No, it isn't. So you've just got very simple language going on here, which they can do from quite a low level once they've got the structure. And then they give their sketch to another group. Maybe you've asked them to do their sketches in pairs. They give it to another group, and the other group has to write the dialogue. So here he's alone, so it's a thought bubble. And so here you could write, what could you write, for example, in this thought bubble?
I am so excited.
Yeah, exactly. It could be very, and that's the thing. I mean, it's super simple. Look at the next one. So my student who was 7 wrote, "Congratulations, farmer." So even, you know, he forgot the yes, because I mean, he's like really, and "thank you very much." Actually, it's quite good for his level. So it can be super simple, or if you've got more advanced students, you ask them to write at least 10 lines, or, you know, and they'll kind of do it. You don't usually have to ask them to do anything, because they've enjoyed the story and they're in it, and they kind of, it comes very naturally. So that's the first one. Now the second exercise, which is similar, except that instead of a drawing, we're going to have bodies. So here, so let's do Roger's idea first, because we were trying to think how we were going to do that, because usually I would put my students into groups of 2 or 3, and I would say, choose a scene in the story and then freeze it. So each person is one character and becomes a statue in a position. So for example, I keep giving the same example because it's very easy. So the wolf blowing the house, the pig scared, the other one running away, for example. And so you've also got the space if you're in a classroom. So here we've got a flat screen and people. So we've got 3 stories: the Gingerbread Man, Li and Gao, and the Mathematician. So what we're going to do is Roger's ideas, and you could do that in a classroom as well, and it's so much fun then, because everybody would just be doing it at the same time. So I would like you to think of a scene, and I would like you to think what character you'd like to be, and when I count to 3, you're going to be that character frozen. So no movement and no words, yeah? So just a position, okay? So has everybody, I need to think as well while I'm talking. Okay, so has everybody got Actually, I'm going to look at you because I'm going to have to look out of the window. So 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I think I can see Lee or Gao. Stay like that. So I can see Lee or Gao. Sheila, are you, Lee, writing the note?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Alvin, are you the mathematician thinking about the riddle? Yeah. Anna, are you the gingerbread man running? Yeah. Lynn, you're also the gingerbread man running? Are you? No. Okay. Can everybody look at Lynn and ask her questions? Sorry. And Beverly, you're the old lady or the old man or one of the animals. Actually, the old lady saying,
yeah.
"Stop! I want to eat you." Okay. Or one of the animals, but then you would have kind of gone like something different. Okay. So what's Lynn doing? So you can ask her, "Are you?" or "Are you?" ing. She can only answer yes or no.
Are you Lynn, are you the woman who made the gingerbread man?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, are you running? Are you running?
Yes.
Okay. So you see, super simple language. It's like, oh, and Roger, we forgot Roger. Can you do this?
Are you the farmer looking out of the train window?
Okay. Yeah. That
The
was the
cows
one.
going backwards. I've never seen cows going backwards.
Okay, fantastic. I can see the time is really getting on. So we're not going to do the other one because it's a bit complicated on the screen anyway. But basically, you would put them into groups of 2 or 3, and they can be the train. So one person can be on all fours, and the other one sitting on their back. They can be somebody can be the window. So somebody can be the window, and then you've got the mathematician looking out. So there's lots of the farmer looking out. So there's lots of different ways of doing this. They can be 2 or 4, even if there's only 2 characters. Yeah.
Can I ask, if you do that physicalization, how do you bring the language into it?
Okay, so that's the next step, is that once they've done that, so one group at a time, you say, okay, come up here, and the class guess who they are, what they're doing, etc. Are you blah blah? Are you doing? Is this when? The same as the sketch one. And then once you've gone through everyone, you say, okay, now come back. And sometimes I give them a minute to prepare, but usually I don't, because if they're a slightly advanced level, again, it's just thinking on your feet, which is what you'll need when you need to use the language when you go to England, for example. And so I'll just say, now animate the scene. So then the gingerbread man starts moving and speaking. So everybody in the group has to say at least one sentence. It could be a thought, oh, I'm so scared, the woman wants to eat me. Or it could be, stop, I want to eat you. Or it could be, well, the window, even the window. So, you do this for more advanced students and be like, oh, this guy, he's got such bad breath. I think that's what somebody said in one of my groups. Or, like, you kind of, or like, oh, I'm tired of this man looking through me. Or, oh, this man is so enthusiastic. So it could just be, every single person has to say a sentence. So that's how the kind of the language, and again, just improvising, not giving them, if you give them time to prepare, it has to be 2 minutes, because they start wanting to make it perfect, and then it just becomes tedious and heavy.
Yeah.
And then you've got lots of things that you can do from the character's point of view. So again, I think Sheila, you did some of those. I think, if I remember rightly. I mean, what I like to do interviews. You could be doing the interview if it's a very low level. So when I do the 3 pigs, I interview, I say, okay, this part of the class, you're pig number 1. This part of the class, you're pig number 3. And this part of the class, you're pig number 2. And then I say, what was your house made of? Were you scared? I'll adapt my language to their level. And then I tell them the story. I tell them that I went and interviewed the wolf. And then I tell them the story from the wolf's point of view. He had a bad cold and he kept sneezing, and the houses were So he didn't intend to eat them at all. So interviews, or if their level is slightly higher, you could get them to prepare an interview. So you have the journalist who gets the wolf onto the TV set, and then they sit in front of the, once they've prepared a bit, okay, so Wolf, why were you running after those pigs? Or Lee, don't you think it was stupid to write that note? Or what do you mean you lost your money? Who do you think stole it? They can just kind of really make some interviews. Once they start seeing your activities, and this is one of the activities, you're already stepping out of the story. So you're making, you're interviewing them, but it's got nothing to do with the story anymore. It's like they're sort of out of the story and inventing new dialogues and new that's what Sheila did, like dialogues that are not in the story, but you ask the students to do them. So that can be done through interviews as well. Or this emotion chart is an activity that I like a lot. So you've got the emotions on one axis, from negative down here to positive up here, and then you've got the time and events down here. So this is for the farmer and the mathematician: beginning of the journey and end of the journey. And so you ask them in pairs. So this is for slightly more advanced students. I did this with an advanced teenager. So this was his chart. So from the point of view of one of the characters, he chose the mathematician because he thought that the farmer always had the same emotions. So he had his first idea. So he was already quite, he was down here very low already. And then he sort of went up when it was the farmer's turn. He got excited. So first idea, he was feeling hopeful. Then he got bored because the farmer said no. Then he got desperate. Then he got hopeful again. He had another idea, etc., etc. And then he was excited, surprised. And then he went up and down while he was trying to find and every chart will be very different, which is so nice. And then they can retell the story. I mean, for advanced, then I got them to write it, actually, because they didn't want to retell the story to people who had just heard it. And that was a brilliant exercise for narrative tenses, for using different emotions, because they always say interesting in Spain anyway. Like if I ask them, how did you feel? Interested. So that's a really nice exercise, and I've done it with younger learners as well, just adapting it a little bit. Just how did he feel? How did he feel? If you want to work on the language in a more precise way, I mean, the freeze the scene and the sketch a scene, we're already using quite language which is quite pinpointed, like you can choose which language. But this one as well, just after stories, sometimes I'll do this da-da-di-da-da exercise, which I got from Andrew Wright, which is a brilliant exercise. So for example, after the Gingerbread Man, I'm going to say da-di-da-da-da, and you have to tell me what sentence I'm actually saying. So da-da-di-da-da from the Gingerbread Man.
Stop, I want to eat you.
Exactly, yeah. Or I mean, there weren't any repetitions. So it's usually or from the Three Pigs. Da-da-dee, da-da-da, da-da-dee, da-da-da.
I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house down.
Just getting them to get the rhythm of the language and to be able to repeat those few sentences that you would like them, to repeat, to have the structure. I mean, in any story for primaries at the beginning, I just even get one sentence that I keep repeating, even if the story is quite linear, and then you can play. Then after a few weeks, I ask them, which stories have we done? And so we write the 5 different stories that we've done. And then I start doing da-da-dee-da-da, and it could be from any of the stories. And they get really good at it. And sometimes they can't say it, but at least they know the sentence, they recognize the rhythm. And so it's just getting used to the rhythm of the language, and little by little, and they love it. And if we play this game a lot, then they end up being able to say the sentences in perfect, grammatically perfect sentences. Not like me right now. So now we've already stepped a little bit out the story, but now we're really kind of completely going, so creating or improvising a dialogue that's not in the story at all. So for example, maybe I could, if there are 2 volunteers here, sure, who would feel like talking, sure, and one of them would be Lee and one of them would be Gao, and then I'd just say, So, for example, I'd get everyone to stand up. This is a nice way of doing it as well, so that they don't sit and try to write. So stand up, stand in 2 lines facing each other, okay? And so I'll say, people on my right, you are all Li. And people on my left, you are all Gao. And then now, it's the next day, you know, Lee has realized that his money's gone, and walk towards each other, and suddenly you see each other and just say something. Okay, so does somebody want to try?
Yep, okay.
So who do you want to be, Lee or Gao?
Oh,
Yes,
Lee.
So Roger, you're Lee. Lynn, you're Gao. You're walking towards each other. Suddenly you see each other. And what do you do? Sometimes you could even run away because you've got the space. But in this case, you're going to actually meet and say something. Go.
Hey, Gao, I want to talk to you.
Oh, great! It's a lovely day, isn't it? I was just about to come and tell you.
No, it's a terrible day.
Look, the sun's shining.
I don't want to talk about sun
shining. The flowers are smelling nice.
I don't want to talk about smelling nice. I want to talk about my 300 yuan.
Oh, what 300 yuan? What are you talking about?
The 300 yuan that you stole from where I hid in the ground.
What makes you think I know you got that?
Because I recognize your handwriting.
I know it was in the ground. It could have been hung in a bag in a tree. How do I know it was in the ground? Now you've told me.
Okay, fantastic.
I saw the note that you wrote.
Okay, great. And so basically I'd give them just like that, 30 seconds. Some of them are like, oh, I don't know what to say. And then I'll say, okay, any interesting exchanges? Then they tell me. And then so the last person from the far end comes to this side, so they've got a new partner. And then, okay, now everybody on this side is Lee and everybody on this side is Gao. And the second time, they'll talk a little bit longer, and there's more kind of ideas floating around, and so they're kind of just saying. And that in that moment, you're not testing them, but they often come and they say, how do you say the way you write? Handwriting. Okay, great. And and after they'll come and they'll ask me kind of words that they wanted to use but were unable to use. So it's kind of getting them to want to use the language rather than sort of testing people all the time. Which as language teachers, we've kind of been trained to do that, because if you look at all the books, it's always the same sort of questions and sort of right or wrong, basically. The main idea of this workshop, this webinar. Another thing, you can just change an element in the story. It could just be one element. So I keep kind of flipping between very advanced more advanced students and lower level students. So this can be super simple. For example, the turnip, the giant turnip. I did this with a group of second graders, and then I told them the story and I said, hey, and what if the story had happened in Africa? What would the vegetable be? And so they came up with, that we kind of Googled it and we found the vegetable that we wanted to use. And then the yucca, or the yucca is more South American, isn't it? I can't remember what anyway. And then I said, but which animals? And so we kind of went through the story again, and they were so engaged, but we kind of told the story again, which can be so boring sometimes if you've just heard it and you're asking them to repeat the same story. But just by changing, and then we sort of, I said, okay, who wants to be so they chose all the animals. Then we chose who would be the giraffes, who would be the elephants, who would be, and so they went from, bigger to smaller to smaller to smaller to smaller. You had the iguana instead of the little rat at the end. And then we performed it. So I was just telling the story and they kept saying, pull, and they pulled and they pulled as to the left, to the right with all their might. And they kind of just repeated those little paragraphs, those little rhymes that I had prepared. And it was kind of like a theater play, but it wasn't just repeating a story that they had. It was really their story. So that's the idea as well, giving them a voice and giving them their own stories in a very easy frame. I've got another one called Inner Thoughts. I've just made the lesson plan for that. That's on my website as well. And that's the Palestinian girls invented a 5-minute play. And it's a girl who kind of goes through and she's envious of her friends. And then she's like, oh, I wish I were her. Look at her big house. And then you've got the friend saying, yeah, but my mother was sick and all the money in the world couldn't save her. Oh, yeah, that's true. And so I get them to write a list of everything they're grateful for, everything that they could be envious in their culture for their age. And I, try not to make it too personal, especially with teenagers. So it's not what you're envious about. It's like, what do people your age, what can they be envious about? And then they rewrite the play, and it's with their envies at their age, European Spanish students rather than Gaza 14-year-old girls. So, and then the whole play changes, and it's really their play, but they've got such a simple, easy frame. So the language is not, they're just using their language, and they want to use language because you're really giving them the chance to express themselves without it having to be too personal. And then discussion questions. So I'd like to show you some of these questions. So if you can read some of these questions and tell me in the chat maybe what do you think about these questions? What do you notice about these questions? Or you can say it aloud. So this idea of moving away from true and false. About these
very
questions.
open. They're all very open. And they, I can see discussion kicking off from them.
Yeah. Anything else? So they're open.
A lot of personalization as well.
Yeah.
And
so, yeah.
I was going to say, and connecting the story, which may have been like, Venezuela. What has Venezuela got to do with us in Singapore? So something that's far away and possibly a long time ago in terms of time, but actually seeing that the story actually does relate to me in my life.
Yeah, exactly. So it's this idea. So what I do with this is I give them, 5 or 10 or 20, according to how much time I've got to write the questions before if I haven't done it. And then they choose 2 questions. So again, giving them a choice. So they can choose to answer something very personal, like, would you prefer to be in Haridas's shoes or Tanzin's shoes? So this is a story about the Emperor Akbar and his court singer. And so it's kind of like, would you like to be, there's the idea of freedom, there's the ideas, and there's kind of like why. So this is quite personal, or what would you like to do in the future? So they're talking about themselves, or they can just simply look up Akbar online and tell us 3 interesting things about him. So they don't have to talk about themselves at all. And I think that's with teachers, we always kind of expect our teenagers or our adults to give their opinion and talk about, but maybe people don't like to do that, especially at the beginning. And once you've told a lot of stories, in any case, people really start sharing more and more. But it's sort of giving people a choice. So they'll choose 2 questions, and then they'll talk about the question that they've chosen to their partner. Or once they start getting used to your type of questions, they can write their own questions as well. So I do that quite a lot. And the questions that I ask elicit stories. So, there was one, do you know anyone whose personality is like Akbar, Tansin or Haridas? And so they start telling stories at this point already. Yes, I have an auntie who, or, oh yes, well, I don't know him personally, but there is this politician. I don't know if they're adults, for example. Views and opinions, give students a voice, or trigger their imagination about something that's not said in the story. And then what you said, Roger, is really nice. Yeah, connecting to how it's quite relevant as well. And I call them open. I call them non-limiting, these questions, Sheila. So kind of, again, moving away from this right and wrong. And bringing emotion, because very often we kind of as teachers anyway, we've been trained so much to do this pre-teaching, during the listening, just to kind of check that they understand. And so we move away from this affective learning, which is effective as well, and this sort of emotional link, which I feel that's how you learn a language best.
I was going to say maybe a question for younger students might be something like, what would you like to say to the mathematician?
Yeah, exactly.
What advice would you want to give him? So that again, it's both personal and it's yet related to the story at the same time.
Yeah, and it's not something that you have to talk about yourself. You're sort of telling somebody else, but you're also telling yourself at the same time. I mean, I think I have 20 questions for this story, but I sort of just presented the 8 ones that sort of show. So you can write, and then they start choosing their own questions as well. And this for me works for everything, actually, just any kind of discussion. Like I had a session with Palestinian students at university in Gaza. And I really didn't know what was appropriate. I didn't know what wasn't appropriate. So I just wrote 20 questions and I said, choose one and come and talk to me. And it was really interesting because one of them said, I said, what are your dreams as a woman, as a Palestinian, and as a human? And she said, you can't ask us this question. We don't have dreams, everything. And I was like, oh my God. And it was really kind of really painful, but she spoke. And I thought, okay. And then another person, and I thought, oh, okay, so I won't ask that question again. And then another person came up and she said, actually, I'd like to answer the same question. I think that everything that we're living through is that's why our personalities are like this. And so, she really kind of lifted the whole spirit of, she had all her dreams and her hopes as a Gazan, as a Palestinian woman. So, that's why it's nice to get them to choose, because still that other girl, even though she was like, you can't ask us that, we don't have dreams, she wanted to talk about it. She chose that question. It wasn't me who chose it for her. Okay, so we're getting to the end, and I like to finish with a reflection so that you really leave with something. But I think so not many of you will be teaching next week, right? Is that correct?
No.
Nobody's actually. Yeah, you'll be teaching, Roger.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe you can use your imagination as well for the others. Like, if you had to go into a context, what context would you go into? And so Roger, maybe you can start because you've got kind of ideas.
Because we talked about this when we reviewed it. That's why I'm seeming to be like the mathematician and so ahead of the game. So I just started a program at a school for teenagers with mild intellectual impairment. And so it's a storytelling session. This will be week 3. And I really love the idea of showing the pictures before. I've not done this before. And just to get them to generate questions and what they think this is about. Because while a couple of them are very surprisingly, well, it surprised me how articulate they are. When I told them the story of the stone cutter, and immediately when I asked the kids, what did that mean? One of the girls came straight back and she said, oh, it's about respecting yourself. And I'm kind of like, huh, wow. So yeah, I thought if a lot of them will find difficulty in generating questions. And I think your idea of having the pictures will get them thinking, and I'll let you know how the activity goes. And I would want to encourage everybody to do that, let's say during the next week or by the end of the month, perhaps. If you do run one of these activities, then drop us a note and we'll be happily then to share it with all the people who've registered for this. Because I think, that's the whole idea of having this webinar, is that Rebecca is sharing some really, to me, they seem very practical ideas. And it would be lovely if you do actually try using them and share your experience, remembering what she said. It's not about right or wrong. And if you find that you run into some difficulty, well, then raise it, and we can see how we might have adapted it the next time.
Yeah. And 2 things to that. These activities, you can also do them even if it's not in a language learning context, just kind of getting the kids to participate. And the questions, Roger, if you, for example, did you notice that then the dialogue was actually made more sense and you had ideas because we had done those pictures, you knew that there was a game. And so, so it's nice to see everybody coming up with different games. Whereas when I have done the same activity without the game, usually the conversation is like, what's your name? What do you do? You know, so it's kind of like there was, you know, you're already giving them hints and little, you know, not at all, you know, I didn't give you the story at all, but just kind of ideas so that the interaction flows better as well. So that's another reason for having the pictures and the words before. Yeah. Okay. And then, yeah, I mean, I think basically if you are in any kind of educational context, so it's what I was saying about classroom management, it really helps even for adults, because we talk a lot about classroom management for kids because they can be a bit unruly, but even with adults it's nice to have this sort of sense of community. Present, like I've done storytelling with business people, you know, it helps them to prepare presentations as well, to sort of the structure of the stories, how they work, how to kind of reach people, how to touch people. Pronunciation, if you're learning the language, because they're listening to it a lot and they're having to use it more and more. And then everything that we've done can be done written as well. So that kind of joins Sheila's workshop about writing. I mean, at the end, people were asking, at the end of Sheila's webinar, people were asking, yeah, but what if my audience are not native speakers? Well, basically, you could just do it orally first and then you do it writing. So you could just simplify it a little bit. So do exactly the same thing as what Sheila was presenting, but just like a little bit, maybe kind of give them a little bit more time, or just pre-teach the vocab or little things like that, which can help. And then the more you start doing storytelling with especially with teenagers and adults, then they want to go and find stories so that they can tell. So the reading is involved. Critical thinking with all the questions, you know, the discussion questions is really in there. They start asking why, and they start deciding. I mean, in those questions, you can ask, well, did you like the end? Would you prefer another end? Do you like the story? You know, not everyone has to agree with the story. And creative thinking, obviously. So this, you know, it just kind of spreads across the different skills and the different, kind of class dynamics. So No, go on.
You have one more slide, and then
I mean, basically two things. So keep in touch, as Roger just said. If you use anything, I've also got a course coming online, which is basically going to be just going into depth, and it's for it's more for teachers than for storytellers, because I am going to spend some time kind of talking about how to do storytelling and how to remember a story without memorizing it, and then lots of like going into these activities and getting people to practice them. But yeah, just you know, keep an eye on my Facebook and my YouTube, and I upload stories there. And then these David Heathfield. So these are the books that I mentioned. So the idea of writing 25 questions and asking them to answer one or two is Rinva Lukri, who's great for storytelling. Andrew Wright, he's written 2 good books. And so these are more for primary students, and these are more for secondary and adults. So that's it. Over to you, Roger. Thank you.
So I don't know if anybody has some questions or comments.
I just see what Lynn wrote. It would be helpful for asylum seekers as well. Do you mean generally storytelling?
The things that you're presenting this evening, I think would help them to learn the languages, even up to adults, to give them that security and kinship. So I wouldn't just stick to seeing it as teaching English to children, but in other types of communities where they need the help with it.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, because maybe that wasn't clear, but it's not at all. I mean, some of the activities children couldn't do them anyway because they were a bit more kind of complex. But yeah, for sure, it's not just for children, and it's not just about learning the language. It really is to share and to. So with the Palestinian, you know, I have some older students and the university women, and it's also linking to the outside world for them because they can't get out of Gaza. And then what you're saying there over here or in Europe, and just kind of finding a community. Yeah, definitely through storytelling is just the best way, and learning the language at the same time.
I would just like to say thank you. You gave us so many ideas.
Oh, great, because I thought you would know them all.
Very nice.
Just never ends, does it?
You know, as somebody,
It's been very, very helpful.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
As somebody, you know, when I was at school, I had to learn French and Latin, and the French was just excruciatingly boring. We always were about, you know, some fictitious family going off to the market and buying legumes. And I remember being shocked. So then when I was teaching in the UK, and we were twinned with a school in Germany, and I went over to visit the school, and I was shocked. I walked into their English lesson. I thought it was their English lesson, but actually it was a science lesson. So these were 15-year-olds, and they were being introduced to the concept of Newton and gravity in English. So here was English was not a foreign language. It was their medium of instruction. And they were learning something very important and exciting in this foreign language. And a couple of years ago, Lynn, I was doing some work at a school out near the airport, so very much a government secondary school, and quite switched off kids. I had them for 2 days doing stories. And I finished by telling them the story of the man who sees the butterfly that's trying to break out of its cocoon. And because he's a good man, he tries to help, and he makes the hole bigger, and he thinks this will help the butterfly. But of course, in doing that, he cripples the butterfly, because the butterfly needs to struggle, right, to break out of the cocoon. And I finished the story by saying that these kids were like this butterfly, that you were struggling to spread their wings and be able to speak in English. And I said, as your teacher, yes, of course, I could make things easy for you. I can give you the answers and keep supplying the words that you need. But I said, you're the ones, you have to fight, you have to struggle, you have to use your English. And at the end of the session, a girl came up to me and she had tears in her eyes. And she said, today, for the first time, I understood why school is so hard. Now I understand why I have to struggle, you know? And this was like a real moment of revelation for her. And I said to her, and tell me, how did you learn that? Did you learn it in Cantonese or you learned it in English? And she said in English. And I said, yes. And this is why it's so good to learn another language, because it just opens you up to other ideas. Not that English is better than Cantonese, but that you're going to hear different things and learn different things. And this is why I think using stories is so important, because forget, as you said all the way through tonight, forget about the language. The kids are learning the language, but your main thing is the ideas that you are communicating through the story. And when you tell Stone Soup and it's all about sharing, this is the important thing that they're going to learn. The language is a bonus, right? And because they are enjoying the story, they are there and they are very open and receptive to learning what the story has to teach, and you're getting the language as a bonus.
Yeah, as a bonus, but it's also like I feel it works better than doing grammar, and so it's as a bonus, but it's also I had a student, a kid, and I said, I'll just tell you a story first, because he said, I have some homework, can you help me? And I said, I'll just tell you a story first. And he said, but we really should do some English today. And he just forgot that he was studying English with me, because I always told him stories. And he said all that in English. It's like, you know, he just had in his mind that English should be, you know, something difficult, and writing grammar and with a book. And
yeah, good. Okay, well, if there are no further comments, we can wrap this up. Thank you very much, Rebecca. We really appreciate that. It's been really
great. Thank you.
Thank you all. It was really nice group. We managed to do all the interaction. Yeah, thank you.
I just want to ask, Beverly, where are you?
I'm in Portugal.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yes.
Wow.
So next to
the
you.
south of Spain. Yeah.
I'm in the north of Portugal.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Anna, are you in Portugal as well?
No, but
Anna.
I'm Portuguese.
Okay. But where are you?
I'm in Singapore.
Ah, okay, okay.
Okay.
And Alvin, where are you? Yeah, and where in India?
Chennai.
Ah, okay, nice.
Yeah.
I lived in Tiruvannamalai for a while, so I passed through Chennai many times.
Okay.
Although it was a small group, it was a very mixed group indeed. That's excellent.
Yeah, it was a good group. Thank you very much to all of you.
Great.
Thank you. Okay,
Yeah.
bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Have a nice evening. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.